Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest installment in BNC's webinar series entitled Smarter, Faster, Better AI for Small Business Owners. Today's topic is a practical discussion around artificial intelligence and how businesses can actually leverage it, like use it in real-life settings within their organizations. My name is Kevin France. I'm COO of BNC, and I'm honored to be joined today by one of our senior technical leads, and I call him our in-house AI aficionado, Lance Gardner. Good afternoon, Lance. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Really excited to be here. AI is obviously a topic that I'm really interested in and spend a lot of time with, and am just really pleased with the results that we're seeing for our clients in the field. And we have a lot of questions about it. So happy to dive in and explore like the nitty-gritty of how people can use this.
I am so excited for today because AI is the latest thing, right? We see it all over the media, and I've tinkered with it a little bit. But really, I don't think it's super clear to business owners en masse how they can use it practically and effectively within their business. So pulling you out for an hour in the field to discuss this, I think we're going to get more out of this hour than I would Googling for the next 10 hours. So I'm super excited about it. Let's go ahead and dive in. First, let's start with today's agenda. Lance, what are you going to walk us through, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start with a kind of overview discussion about what AI is and how it works, and why recently it's become kind of a big deal. It's the new kind of hot thing in tech, and what some of the reasons are why that is. We're going to talk about some of the differences in major AI platforms. Since a lot of people look at it and say, well, is AI just one flavor and it's just branded? So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about using AI prompts, which you might have heard about. There's even a new job now called prompt engineers, where there are folks who just build really effective prompts for AI. So we'll talk about how people can, how business owners can leverage and employees can leverage that to be more efficient. We'll talk about what AI can do for you. So what are some of the best use cases for small and medium-sized businesses to leverage AI? And on the inverse side of that, we'll talk about what AI is not great at doing for you and places where you probably want to stay away from leveraging it. Then we'll dive into what you can do with AI specifically in the Microsoft ecosystem. A lot of our clients are Office 365 clients, and there are a lot of cool integrations there. So we'll touch on specifically what those are. Then we'll touch on some really kind of practical, task-oriented things about how we can leverage AI to help us organize tasks and be more efficient and productive. Since I know that certainly is something that I'm not always great at. So anything we get to help there is super beneficial. So then we'll talk a little bit about what the business ramifications are from AI. Like, is it industry changing? What should business owners be thinking about? Then we'll get to questions from our audience, and then the piece that I'm very excited about at the end is we're actually going to do a live demo of some of these things in practice on air, and go through it in real time and show people how it works.
That's going to be the best part. You saved the best for last, which is probably a good idea. Not your first rodeo, I suspect. Great. Okay, well, let's start. We all remember back in the 80s and 90s, right? The Terminator movies. Arnold Schwarzenegger was this like android assassin built on AI, right? This was the 80s. And he was going to take over the world. It seemed like fiction back in the day. Now it seems a little more real. So could you speak to me a little bit about it? Let's talk about the history of AI. I was totally surprised here that it started well before the 80s.
Yeah, that's true. So it goes back to when mainframe computers really were like a thing, and the concept of AI, which really is processing and crunching large amounts of data to pull out insights that aren't readily available to a person, because they just can't really deal with all those inputs and make sense of them. So it's been around since the 50s. And when we talk about like the specific types of AI, there's kind of consensus that there are three general buckets of that. There's narrow AI, which is AI that's trained on a specific data set and can answer questions in the realm of that but really can't delve outside of those realms. So even something that has like a really vast amount of data that has access to it, like ChatGPT, which largely has access to the entire internet, that would still be considered narrow AI. Like it can answer questions on anything that it has access to, but can't really address things outside of that. Then the second phase of AI, if you will, would be general AI. And that's AI that would be on par with we could think of it as like human intelligence. And it's not necessarily things that are super complicated. A good example of that would be, let's say that you were over at a friend's house and you wanted to make a cup of coffee in a kitchen that you've never been in. Well, you may have to fumble around in a couple cabinets, but you generally understand what that process looks like and like what a coffee mug, where coffee mugs are and how you would do all that. That's not something that AI currently, as it stands, could really do.
So ways to go on that.
Yeah, so a little ways to go on that in some cases there. So something like that, like a simple task. In other instances, though, we're getting pretty close. So there is a thing that's called like the Turing test, which basically states, can AI produce something that you can't tell it was produced by a person or AI? And we're reaching kind of a tipping point there where, especially on the marketing end, even professional marketers have a hard time determining if content was AI generated or if it was something that a person actually developed. So we're getting really close to that one. And then the kind of cool, more futuristic one is super AI, super intelligence AI. And you can think about that as either like the computer or data from Star Trek, where
or Terminator,
or Terminator, or Skynet from Terminator, that you have something where not only does it contain all of the information of mankind, is its ability to reason and extrapolate and create new things extends far beyond our abilities.
That's crazy. So if I'm hearing you right, there's still limitations today, but those limitations are quickly evaporating, and we're heading toward like human intelligence.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's where we're headed towards there. And I think as we're seeing that curve accelerate, that it's not really like a flatline curve.
Mhm.
It's that we'll hit a point where we get to general and it can start training and learning on data that it's creating. And from there, we'll see a really steep acceleration.
Wow. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Kidoki. Well, Lance, what accounts for the recent surge in AI? So, I read in the press millions of dollars per organization, in some cases tens of millions, hundreds of millions are going into this technology. Reminds me back of the internet.com days when just money was flying into these organizations. Google, Microsoft, they're all playing at huge levels. What accounts for this? Why?
Yeah, so if we look at that, there are really three main areas why we're really seeing AI take off now. And the first one is just the availability of big data. So AI needs a lot of data to get trained on, to get really good at answering specific questions or doing specific tasks. And when we think about the junction of the combination of all the data that's on the internet, along with social networks, is there's just a tremendous amount of data out there. There's over 175 terabytes of, or 175 petabytes of data on the internet. So when we think about the vast amounts of data it has access now to, and the breadth of data that it has access to, that it can really answer questions on a lot of different things based on training on that data. The second was, so it's great that we have a lot of data. The second piece, though, is we need to be able to do something with that data and to train it. And the big advancements there are you might have heard of GPUs. So those would be.
And what are those?
Yeah,
I know what a CPU is.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what a GPU is as much as a CPU.
Right. So most people's introduction with GPUs would be either that your kid asks you for a fancy gaming computer that has some light up pieces and it has this big card in it that you plug all their monitors into, or if you do CAD design. So really, they were originally are invented to do high-end graphics processing. Well, it turns out that those chips on those cards are also very, very good at doing processing for AI. And the reason is because they contain thousands of small CPU cores that can process a bunch of data in parallel. So it can really churn through a lot of information much more quickly than traditional traditionally designed CPUs, we're also starting to see like purpose designed processing cards for AI. TPU, which is a tensor processing unit, is something that Google invented that's specifically designed to process AI content. So we're seeing hardware that's designed for it. And then the third piece, which is probably at least as important, if not more than the first two, is innovations in AI architecture. The biggest one there is the transformer architecture. And the key point there is that there is this thing called self-attention. And self-attention means that it's not really just looking at words and processing them in context and assigning numeric values, and then looking at like, okay, I see all these words in this specific pattern all the time, and so I can gain insights from that. It's actually crossing over and creating connections between words that are more important in particular sentences and things that may not seem related. So it's drawing connections between things, very similar to like a neural network in terms of how our brain processes. So its ability to make connections and leaps is much, much better than with previous iterations.
So it is Terminator. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Right. Makes sense. And more bandwidth, right? I mean, remember the 56 baud modems, like when the internet first started, can't do much as you're waiting for the screens to load with text, but we have huge pipes.
Right. That's also true is you look at something like the AOL days with a modem, and now you can very affordably, even in your house, get full gigabit speed internet. So the ability to access all this massive amounts of data very quickly.
Makes sense. Okay. All right. So we have the three big ones. We have ChatGPT, Copilot, which is a Microsoft product. We have Gemini, which is a Google product. I've used ChatGPT to do things like write scripts for Salesforce, for our CRM, our business program. I've used it to write very complex Excel formulas. I get how that all works, but I'm not as familiar with this integration for Copilot and Gemini. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. That's a great question that we get a lot of times is it kind of one size fits all and they just all do the same thing or in different places? And really there are some fundamental differences in terms of how they work. So we'll start with ChatGPT, which was really the original one that became public. So it's the most known one, and tends to be on sort of the cutting edge of that technology because they developed a lot of that. So that's ChatGPT is owned by a company called OpenAI. They have built a really kind of platform agnostic product. So there are a bunch of APIs that it can integrate, like you were mentioning Salesforce, is that you can have it directly integrate that like that for tasks. It also has a huge ecosystem of pre-trained models that are publicly available. So if you wanted specific information on, say, car repair on Fords that are newer than 2020, or even a specific model, is you can likely search and find a pre-trained bot that somebody has built.
What's a bot?
Yeah. So good question about a bot. So a bot is really just any type of AI that doesn't really have like general instructions like these large language models we're talking about here, ChatGPT or Copilot, is that it also either has specific training on data or it is restricted to that data. So in this example, you would train it exclusively on, call it Ford service manuals. And so it can return very quickly and specific questions about anything that's related to the data that it's been trained on.
Got it. Okay. That all makes sense. I get asked this by a lot of our clients. If they're on O365, right, Microsoft product, they understand that Copilot is part of it or can be integrated. Those that are still on Google, they ask me, well, does the Gemini program operate like that? Does it create these efficiencies and these ability to create content within that ecosystem? So Google Sheets, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so we'll jump into those as well. The first one is MS Copilot. Now, MS Copilot is partially based on the ChatGPT engine. There's a good reason for that. Microsoft is the largest shareholder in OpenAI, so they own 49% of AI. So OpenAI, so they're partnered together, but its engine works a little differently. So because of the deep integration with Office 365 products, Outlook, Excel, Teams, things like that, and the nature of how people use those products, it's more geared towards like task oriented, or efficiency things, as opposed to general questions. Doesn't mean it can't answer those general questions, but that it's more targeted to, you can think of it as like task-oriented questions.
Got it.
Gemini, on the other hand, which used to be called Bard in its original iteration, Google did a bunch of work with it, improved the engine significantly, and now it's the Gemini product. Like a lot of things that Google does, or Google was initially known for, is it's very good at searching. So augmenting searching, you in fact see some of its outputs when you see that thing at the top of your search. If you do a search in Chrome now, where it says, hey, this is AI generated information, that's the Gemini engine that's doing that. They subsequently have begun integrating it into things like Sheets and Docs, like you mentioned, similar to what Microsoft is doing with 365. But because that's been a little later into the game there, that integration isn't quite as holistic as what you would see on the 365 platform currently, at least.
And I presume both of these platforms for that integration is pay to play, right? You have to pay extra for the Copilot integration. Likely you have to have paid subscriptions to Google. Is that true?
That is true. And that's true of all of these products, at least on, if you want to get the maximum out of what they do. You do have free versions of ChatGPT that's available, although it's got limitations in terms of what kind of data it has access to. Copilot, similar, you may have seen if you have Windows 11, that it now shows up in your taskbar. Microsoft is offering access to that as a preview, but it is limited in terms of what it can do. Gemini, conceptually similar. There are some things you can do for free, but if you want all the features and you want it to really be able to integrate with your data that you have in those providers, you either need to have licenses on the 365 side or on the Google Workspace side.
Well, I know one of the demos you're going to do at the end will actually create a PowerPoint from scratch. That was cool when I saw you do it prior to the webinar. So that's one to wait for. I can't wait to see that one. It's going to be great. Okay. So seems like the quality of the prompt is key, the way you ask AI. True?
That's absolutely true. And you can think of it as similar to if you're asking just a general question, the more specific your question is, the better response you will get out of that. And so there's a particular formula that we'll look at in terms of how you get the best type of response from any type of AI engine. And that is that the first thing is we want to give it a task, and we want that task to be as clearly defined as it can be. The second piece is we want to give it some context around that task, so it understands like who's our audience, or what are some nuances around what we want to get out of here. The other thing that we want to do is we want to give it a persona. So we want to say, for example, you can ask your AI engine to operate as if it were a particular type of job or a role in your life. And so it can provide an answer from a particular perspective. Then we want to give it we'd like to give it a tone. So do you want it to be professional? Do you want it to be funny? Do you want it to be informative? You can also set some tones in terms of should it be for a particular audience from an age perspective at like an 8th grade level, depending on who your audience is. Then we want to provide it a format. So do we want it to write something in an outline? Do we want it in a table? How do we want the output to be presented? And then the last one is we can provide it some examples on things that we want it to work like, and provide some context about that. So if we have somebody that we really admire their writing, we could say, hey, I want something that sounds kind of like it was written from this blog post.
You know, this takes me back to college, English lit, right? So when you're writing stories, they tell you to think about the tone, think about the audience. I can't, that just hit me as we were sitting here chatting. And it's very similar to that. I mean, when you're creating this request, and the other thing that hits me is that I think through, like, when I ask my significant other, hey, what do you want? Where do you want to go to dinner tonight? And it's an open-ended question. I don't think we ever get to an answer.
Yep.
Right? I think everyone can relate with that versus, hey, hon, why don't we go do Italian food like that place we had in New York within 5 miles? You add some of these elements you're speaking to, and then it compresses the response and you actually get to what you're looking to get to. Is that a comparable analogy?
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. And similarly, if you have that same type of open-ended conversation with AI, you'll find that it takes about the same amount of time that it takes you and your significant other to decide where you want to. It's first AI is going to come back and say, well, what kind of food do you want?
Exactly.
And so there's going to have to be a lot of back and
let's just eat in.
exactly a lot of back and forth before you get to an answer. So the more specific you can be about what you want the output to be, the better your responses are going to be.
It really is garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, the more specific you take care of those elements, you're probably going to get the output you're looking for. Makes sense. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this case, we've got a couple of examples here. We've got a not so great example about what you might use if you want to generate content for something like this. So our first example here, we're just asking it to help us put together an outline for a webinar presentation on AI. Well, AI is a massive topic, so we're likely to get a very broad general response there, and are also likely to get at least some elements included that aren't even within the realm of what we want to present, based on that, as opposed to our better one here, which is where we're asking it to help us put together an outline for our webinar presentation on AI, which is our task. We want it to be geared for medium-sized businesses to help accelerate growth and maximize employee productivity. So we're giving it some context. We want it to be something that an IT professional could provide to clients. So we're giving it a persona or a perspective. And then we also want it to be professional and friendly. So we're providing some tone. We want it to be formatted to work well as part of a PowerPoint presentation. So we're giving a format. And then if we wanted to also add an example, we could say, use this blog post as a reference style, which would be our exemplar. And then we could provide a link to a blog post on AI that we liked or think has some relevant information or style.
So you're framing it so it has an example. It'll go look at that and it'll be part of its consideration in the process.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Okay. I didn't think of that. Good. Yeah, again, you're giving it more information, you're going to get a better response. Makes sense. All right. So let's say I'm a business owner. I know what AI is now. How can I use it to leverage in my current environment, right? I have team members that I'm trying to create efficiencies for. How do I go about using AI to get more out of my people?
Right. And this is a great question, and is a question we get a lot from clients
every day.
As they say, I know about AI as this esoteric, cool thing, and I know that I can use it to help my kids with ideas or options to write their paper for school, but how can I leverage it to actually use in my business, or how can my employees leverage it? So these are really the top 4 buckets that we would say AI is good at. These are things that AI is good at, that it does not require a ton of effort to get it up and working and making people a lot more efficient. The first one here is it can automate repetitive tasks. So if you've got something you do all the time, and it has a very predictable set of inputs and outputs, then you can have AI help you do that. A couple of good examples here is that you can build either an external or internal chatbot, which we touched on a little bit. So it's just something that has a specific data that it is trained to respond on, and then some parameters around what those responses look like. So you can, instead of having, say, like a wiki or how-to page that you might reference for internal service decks for your clients, where they go there and they have to like search for this issue, and then they maybe have to find this article that they link to, is you could take all that data, compress it into a bot, so they can do that much more interactively and more quickly. So they can just say, this is the problem that I have. And the bot goes and searches and looks at that data that's contained in those same sources that you already have it formatted, but can present it and distill it in a way that makes it much easier to interact with than some of those more traditional methods of doing that. The second thing that it's pretty good from an automation or task piece is if you have, a good example would be, I could say that you are a construction worker and you build a bunch of estimates, or your team builds a bunch of estimates, but you go ahead and kind of go through the same process where you've got this subset of inputs, and then you've got these preferred vendors, and you put together these pricing models, and you do all that. Well, you could train and create a script for AI, and you could even build your own AI interaction in the ChatGPT world that is kind of trained on that. And from there, you could just go through and enter all the information and say, okay, here's our job. Here's how much of this material we need. It can go out and price it from your vendors. You can tell it how many hours it is. It can do all the legwork of entering those formulas to calculate your labor and put it together. So now this task that used to take you several hours, of which only required your actual brain power for about 30 to 45 minutes, and then just iterating all these tasks, to now it takes care of all those tasks. You spend the 30 to 45 minutes, and now you've got this output.
So back in the olden days, before AI was popular, you'd have your marketing department have the marketing info, sales has their information, operations has theirs, and you'd form like maybe some FAQs on your website. Now it sounds like you can bring all of this information together, have AI learn from all of it, and be more human-like in responses, right? I mean, you could shut off elements that you don't want to go to the public, but sales and marketing data can be integrated more than we probably have in the past, as an example.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that really touches on the second one that's on our list, which is analyzing large data sets.
Yeah.
Is very good at pulling a bunch of different information from different locations, analyzing that together, and then providing insights that otherwise would remain siloed in the example that you just mentioned. Like if the marketing and sales data don't really coalesce, or it would take a lot of time to do that's something that, as long as it has access to data sets, you can really ask any kind of questions around that and get meaningful insights quickly returned. With the caveat being that the results are only going to get returned as the data that you give it, which we kind of touched on earlier. Is if you've got good data, you get good results. If you've got bad data, you get questionable results there. Third piece there is generating content. We talked about that a little with prompts. Is if you do a lot of copywriting or marketing writing, it's very good at that. And then the last one is personalizing experiences. We've all seen this already, certainly on the social media and sales side. If you wanted to know, how does Amazon know that I'm interested in this thing that I've never looked at before? It's because they've got a bunch of data that they pull about all of their clients and specific to you and things that you've bought in the past. And they know that if you like these three things, that there's a 95% possibility that you'll like this other thing too. And so that now is something that was really only available on kind of a large scale. And it's been distilled down to where even small businesses can do that and can integrate similar things on their e-commerce platforms.
See, I always assumed Amazon just had this drone following me everywhere I went, tracking everything I'm doing. I know they don't, but I'm just saying.
I'm not saying that they don't do that.
I don't know. Maybe they do.
Yeah. But certainly they have a lot of information about not just yours, but similar demographics. And spending habits. And so they bring all that stuff together to provide really useful recommendations.
Wow. A lot going on there. That makes sense. Okay. So we've talked about what AI can do for you. How about we spend a little bit of time talking about what it can't do? That may be just as important.
Yes. There are certainly some things that it's not great at currently. First one is really understanding nuance and emotion. So it doesn't really have any type of EQ. It has some kind of contextual limitations in terms of what it can understand based on data that it's trained on. And since it doesn't really have any emotional intelligence, it's not really great at providing that kind of feedback. Or when it does, because it says, oh, I know I should respond in this way because I have this manual on like crisis operating, it's just pulling things from there, but it doesn't really understand how those feel and may make poor choices.
So the human nuance.
Yeah, the human side nuance piece, actually similar to how Arnold Schwarzenegger interacted with folks in Terminator, is he didn't really sound like a person, and there's a reason why. He wasn't particularly well programmed for that.
That line, "Come with me if you want to live." He had good intentions.
He did,
but that didn't land.
Yeah, didn't land really well. No. Second one is think creatively or innovate. So we touched a little bit on even though it can provide even though AI can provide innovative outputs, is all those outputs are based on the constraints of data that it's trained on. So it can't create unique things that are outside of data that it has been trained on or has access to. So there are no new novel ideas around that is capable of coming up with. So certainly not the type of creativity you would expect from a child.
So you're saying that people still have a role in this?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. We've established that.
We've at least still got to come up with ideas on things. Third one, then it's not very great at, similar to the emotional piece, is it's not great at making ethical judgments on this. And if we're talking about this from a practical use case with business owners, that if you do automate some of your customer service pieces, you may not want AI in charge of determining, say, for example, when clients can return items that might be past their warranty, because AI is not really going to take a lot of information into in nuanced information to context. So if somebody wanted to return an item and it was outside of the return period, but they didn't actually receive the item until a week after they were supposed to, AI is just going to look at that and say, oh, well, here's the rule, here's the date. Yeah, we're not going to do that. Whereas if you have an experienced customer service rep on the phone, they are going to take additional information into consideration and determine what they think the right thing to do is.
Unless that's fed into the model, right? So if you say, hey, there's some leeway here in this case, then it would probably take that into account.
It would,
but otherwise,
it would take it into account, but not really so much on a case-by-case basis. You can think about that essentially it will do a math problem. And so if you can say, you should take this into account, and then it will look at it and say, oh, okay, here's my subset of ones that were past a date of return. Here's the ones that we allowed. I calculate that there's an 83% chance. I'm going to run this 6 times and see where I land and come back with yes or no. Right. So it's not really going to take the specific situation into context, just more an overarching principle and turn it into a math problem.
So for our attorney clients listening, they're not at risk of losing their job. Sounds like they're so fine, right? Because there's someone that needs to be out there making ethical decisions. Of course, team members too, but it's an example of a profession that's probably safe for now.
Right. Absolutely. And then the last one, which we've touched on a couple of times already, is it really can only operate with quality data. So if you don't have quality data, then what you can see is it will start to magnify the errors or the biases in your data exponentially as it continues to iterate through all these processes. So you'll see, whereas there might have just been a small issue initially in your data set, that as it continues to train on that gets reinforced over and over again. So you can see progressively erroneous or biased results if you've got poor data.
Makes sense. Good. I mean, I think that slide's just as important as any other as you're trying to frame prompts and interact with AI. Okay, so what practical use applications are you seeing from clients, of course, without naming client names, in the field? How can folks use AI day in and day out? Here's the meat of the matter.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of our clients are Microsoft clients. So they're in the Office Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And in that case, we're talking about the Copilot tools, and they really have come a long way and can do a cool thing. We touched a little bit on what we'll do in the live demo, which is creating a PowerPoint presentation, but it can do that from scratch. And you can think of it as that, although it's good, it can do a pretty decent job from a content perspective. At least for me, I know that my issue with it is getting the whole thing formatted and consistent, and then finding images that make sense and work together well. And just from a design aspect, like that piece probably takes me as long as the content. And this is something that the Copilot tool can do in seconds.
Hours and hours of work. I mean, we're talking, multiply that across the entire organization's ecosystem. That has impact, can have impact on allowing employees that would be doing this over and over and maybe getting brain farts, et cetera, et cetera. Now the AI does it and they spend the last 5 or 10 minutes of their time working on it, correcting and updating. Real efficiencies.
Right. And reduces things like frustration and fatigue and some of those things. Because by the time that I usually get to the part that I want to do, I feel burned out from doing all this stuff that
and it's like at 10 o'clock at night. And you're like, or midnight. And I mean, your mind's not in the right mindset then anyway.
Exactly. All this stuff that I don't want to do and that I'm not very good at.
Right.
Right. So from those perspectives, from that perspective, it can be really helpful. Another one of the use cases 365 side that's pretty cool is integration with Teams. So I know starting certainly in 2020, like right around the pandemic, Microsoft had made a really smart decision in allowing everybody to have access to Teams for free. And based on that, a lot of people started using it for meetings and collaboration. And even since it's been moved to a pay-to-play model, a lot of teams have just adopted, and companies have just adopted that as their kind of de facto platform for collaboration, collaboration in meetings.
And I use the AI tool in Teams to summarize meetings. So if I have to leave, I try not to do this often, but if I have to leave halfway through a meeting, Teams can summarize the meeting, tell me who has tasks afterwards. I mean, it is crazy.
It is,
and it's accurate.
It is very cool. Yeah. So it knows who's talking,
yeah,
what tasks have been assigned to which person,
yeah,
what information might be pertinent to work on those tasks. And it's getting better and better. So some of those things where you had to purposely generate a summary now,
yeah,
it's included in the recording meeting. So you just open the meeting and there's an AI recap that's got all of the information in there. You can also do daily planning and like automation tasks with that. So it can do things like summarize emails. It can help draft responses to emails, either based on input that you give it or just some contextual short answers they can expand on. So you get an email that's asking you if you would like to participate in this particular like activity or meeting. Is you could have it draft a yes or no, or you could say maybe, but I want some more information. So with one click, you can have it automate a response for that. And you can go in and like tweak it, add your salutation or whatever, but it handles a majority of the kind of heavy lifting, especially on those quick responses to things like that, and take that off of your plate.
Let me tell you, I save 5 to 10 hours a week using the meeting planner, right? Where I don't have to worry about figuring out my schedule, finding windows. It does that all for me. I'm not kidding you, Lance. I save so much time. Think about how much time most people spend scheduling meetings. And I use an AI-driven engine for that. I see the value in my life for daily planning and tasks. Call it executive functioning skills. That's probably the one thing I spend most of my time with my team on honing, and probably the biggest time suck as a result when it's not properly implemented. So I see that every day, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers here will relate with that as well.
And our clients, right? That those are that you do have certain employees or subsets of employees that tend to be really good at organizing things. Right. But if you are like me, I'm not great at all of those things. So anything that can help me do that and take those things off of my plate just gives me so much higher functioning capacity to do the things I am good at.
Yeah.
And then take these things that I don't want to. Yeah.
It supercharges you and the entire employee team at large.
That's a perfect way to think of it, is that it supercharges your employees to be as efficient as they possibly can.
That's great. Yeah, it's exciting to see where this is all going to go. Okay. Data security. This is a huge topic. We have to spend some time on this, right? Data privacy. I mean, some of these models are public. I presume they're learning on what I put in there. What can I put in, right? I mean, this is important as anything for employees that might be put. I mean, you told me a story. You should share it about how folks at Samsung put in some proprietary information. That's a great way to start this section.
Right. It absolutely is. And the example you mentioned about Samsung. Yeah. So there were some Samsung engineers that were working on a chip design for their product, and they provided both proprietary information as well as like actual technical specific chip designs that then some of their competitors were able to extract out of the engine. So to your point, is the assumption that you should make, especially if you're leveraging a free product or one that you have not specifically reviewed the data privacy guidelines around, is that it's training on your data. And in a lot of cases, that's why if you look at how did ChatGPT get so good so fast, because it trained on all of the feedback that folks were providing it by being able to use it for free.
Okay,
And
so don't give ChatGPT your social security
yeah,
number. Or bank account.
no social
That-
security
But
numbers.
the nuance, what's in, I mean, anything you put into it. So anything that a company, it's really important folks figure out what's confidential in their organizations and not either buy a service. I presume are there services you can cordon off and not have it be part of the public domain, the ether?
Yes. And so as you get into more of the paid services there,
Mhm.
they're going to have some of those privacy protections already. And a lot of the companies that are building these AI tools into their products understand that. And so they have some governance tools around that. Microsoft does, for example, they leverage Purview. So you can really set some tight guidelines about what kind of data it can and can't access that. And at least currently, on there, one of the things specific to that ecosystem, and similarly on the Gemini side, is that they don't train on data that you provided.
Right.
So they're training their models outside of that, but they aren't training on the specific data that you give it access to. It's just providing outputs based on that. So that would be one side of it. If you're getting into more of the like personal data side. So probably saw that Apple recently released the iPhone 16. One of the big pieces there is the AI integration into that model and what some of the things it can do are. And then Google on the other side also has a Pixel phone that they released with Gemini into that. I know there are some concerns there. Largely, it only has access to the same data that it had before, which is that if you have an iPhone and you're syncing your data to iCloud, or you're on the Google ecosystem and you're syncing your data there, they have access to that data already.
Right.
So to some extent, that's just gonna be like the price for those tools. I think they can be really cool and really functional as essentially personal assistants in that space.
Well, part of it's generational too. Like, and I'm not saying you're old, but we're older, right? And so we come from the maybe the thought process of we're not going to share everything out on the cloud. But folks like my kids, they don't think anything of it because all of their data was on the cloud when they started their technology journey. So I think part of it's generational, but we still have to remember the data privacy component and be very careful what we're feeding into these models. Because you can't pull it back, can't unring that bell, right? Once you provide it to the ether, if you will.
That's exactly right. And that really is a key consideration, is that once it's out there, you really can't pull it back in.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you have an idea about what, if you do have any type of governance or compliance requirements, that the data that you are leveraging for AI should fall within the same constraints that all the rest of your data does as it pertains to those types of things.
And you have mentioned to me in the past, private AI is becoming a thing, right? Where you can cordon it off and have it learn. If you do have confidential information, you can have it learn just within your system and protect it from possible, but you have to set that up. Yeah,
right. That's an emerging thing. VMware, Broadcom are kind of on the front end of some of that. But now that the ability, largely, this is more kind of technology driven, is that you can scale down the technology to be able to do what these large language models are doing internally, is you can run entire private AI infrastructures. So you can still leverage things like a ChatGPT models internally, access to your data, all of the training information, and all of that is self-contained. It's not necessarily always an inexpensive solution, but it certainly is an option.
That's good to know. It's good to know. All right. So I sit on this AI advisory board out of the University of Colorado, where all we do is talk about AI from different industries. And I think one of the biggest things that come up in these sessions that I'm a part of, especially from business owners, is this idea of how do I cut costs, right? So most business owners, their largest expense on their profit and loss statement is salary.
Mhm.
So they're always looking at ways to cut that. And some of the folks that I believe are short-sighted look there first to make cuts, right? Hey, can I replace people? And the problem with that I find on this advisory board specifically is that creates potential coups with the employees, right? Because they're like, well, you replace. I mean, some back office jobs may be removed, but I know it's a net positive for the most part, what I read, where anything that's replaced or anything that's deprecated will be replaced with new roles. But really, what comes out of most of the discussions we have is a desire to focus on efficiencies of the current team and maximizing that versus replacing or deprecating positions. I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts about that?
That's very consistent with the approach that essentially all of our clients are taking.
Makes sense.
Is that it's looking to increase the efficiency of knowledge workers. And that's the number one use case currently for AI, is again back to the concept of like supercharging your employees so they can not only get more things done, but produce better results and spend more of their time doing the things that they're really, really good at.
Right. So, most knowledge-based employees are working 40 to 50 hours a week in most cases. Those 40 to 50 hours has a very defined amount of brain resource that can be put to company tasks. What if you can what if you can get a 30, 40, 50% increase on that by removing some of these rudimentary tasks and getting more high-level output from each of your team members? What does that mean? That increases the bottom line.
That certainly is the concept.
Is that the idea? I mean, that's what I'm hearing from you, and that's what I'm hearing from the ecosystem.
That's exactly the concept, is doing that. In terms of the concern from like an overall economic standpoint of jobs being taken away by AI, there have been a bunch of large organizations. One is the World Economic Forum's Future Jobs Report, which did estimate that by 2025, there may be up to 85 million jobs replaced by AI, but that those will open up opportunities for at least 97 million new jobs related to it. So
it's a net positive.
Yeah, so the consensus is that it's a net positive from a job creation perspective.
Right. And those jobs are supercharged. That's the takeaway. Great. Good stuff. All right, everyone, that completes the content portion of our webinar. So we have reserved some time here toward the end to answer a couple of questions. If you haven't put them in the chat box, please do so. We'll answer just a couple of questions this time because we want to leave enough time for Lance to do some real life demos, because I know that's a lot of folks have already asked for that in the chat window when that's coming. So we'll make sure that we have time to do that, because that's the exciting part. So first question here.
What do we got?
What should a small business prioritize when budgeting for AI tools and services? Are there any hidden costs?
Now, this is a great question, and it's one that we get from our clients a lot. Similar to the cloud, is like, hey, I know about this thing, but what do we actually need to do this? And what should we be thinking about there? So the top couple things that I like to talk to customers about is, one is identify where your business need is for AI. Is what is the one, or what are the couple of things that you'd like to leverage AI to do in order to make your business more efficient? So based on that, we can determine what tools make most sense there. And then the second one is, what are your scalability or integration considerations? Like, do you have a line of business application that you want to integrate this with? Or do you have a large set of custom Excel files that you built over your financials, so you want it to be able to interact with your financial data? How do you want to be able to scale that? And then the third piece there would be kind of training. It would be training and support. So these tools are like any other tools. The better training that your employees have on them, the more efficient they're going to be. So from like an upfront training perspective, as well as like an ongoing support perspective. So understanding what we think needs there might be. If in terms of hidden costs, there can be implementation and customization fees. So if you do have something that looks very open-ended, chances are there are some price points associated with customizing that and getting that integrated into your particular suite of applications that you use from a business perspective. And then data preparation and cleaning. So to the privacy considerations is you want to make sure that the data is validated, especially if you're getting that out of like a legacy system, and then as needed or desired, if it's clean. So if you have, say, PII that's in your data line of business database, and you want
PII is personal information.
Yeah, personal information. Yeah, if you've got PI in there, well, you want to clean and anonymize that.
Get it out.
So that can be a cost consideration there.
Not everyone needs the same level. I know, like, for example, for Copilot, some folks don't need AI, some need like I don't have the full suite in my application. You have the full suite because you're the AI aficionado. You need it, but you can scale it up or down depending on what each of your team members use. So you can do some cost control there, right? It's not a one size, hey, everyone has to have the same subscription and it's going to, blow your budget out the door.
That's absolutely true. So in the case of Copilot, or on the Gemini side with Workspace, is Google Workspace, is you can license those individually, and then they can still leverage outputs that are useful for the team. So if you have, say, folks in your marketing department who generate a bunch of your PowerPoint presentations, they could have access to those tools,
right,
and generate content that you then share with the company, but not everybody has to have that same tool.
Makes sense. Okay. Next question. Let's see here. What data protection measures should I implement when using AI platforms like ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot? So this is around, I think, more of what we talked about with the data privacy and protection.
Right. This is another one of the big questions that we get a lot. So the first piece is, like anything else, you want to limit sensitive data sharing. So in some cases, that means if you don't currently leverage, and we'll just use the 365, the Copilot for this example. Most of the backend data sharing on that is in SharePoint. So if you don't leverage SharePoint like a file system, and you have, say, more a traditional file system that lives on your servers, you would still want to configure parameters around who has access to what data, similarly to how you limit access to sensitive data on those shares that are on your servers. And when you do that, then folks can't use the AI engine as a way to get access to stuff that maybe they shouldn't be seeing. So you just want to set common sense controls and restrictions around what data should be available to folks. And then the other piece there is you want to use secure access controls. So you want to make sure that you really have tight groups around who can see what, who has access to what, who can share what. Those kinds of things become kind of important when you're considering integrations with AI. And then really the kind of bigger overarching one is that you want to use platforms that you trust. So they now are going to have access to even more data than they did previously. And in some cases, they have access to some sensitive data that they did not previously have access to. So you want to make sure that the people that you are partnering with on here are companies that you trust.
So you want to have guardrails, and you want to be purposeful in setting the limits on those guardrails going in.
Yes. And these are things that make sense to do up front than to try. It becomes more difficult if you try and build the car where it's on the racetrack. To use that analogy. Yeah,
that makes sense. Okay. Let's do one more question, and then I'm going to pass the controls to you and get to what I know a lot of people are super excited for, and that's the live demo version. Okay, one more. Let's pick a good one. What key considerations should be included when drafting a company-wide AI usage policy? Whoa, probably do a whole webinar on that.
This is
summarize it for us.
Yeah, this
AI it for us.
Yeah, exactly. We'll try and distill this down into some quick guidelines. The first thing is that if you don't have one of these policies, it's probably a good idea to have one, because if you don't provide some guidelines around how your employees use AI, then they're going to use it however they see fit.
Exactly. They'll create the guidelines.
Yes.
And management may not like the outcome.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Your best, most efficient employees are always looking for ways to be better and more efficient.
Right.
So they'll leverage these tools to do that, and they'll make their own judgments on what they think those guidelines are if you don't set them for them.
Could be good. Could be bad. Flip a coin. Yeah, we don't want to hope for the best.
Right.
We want to define those.
Exactly. So you want these to reflect and be similar to acceptable use policies. If you have those in place and have that a part of it, You want to make sure that you have some data privacy guidelines
Mhm.
around those, a little bit like how we touched on previously. And then you also want to make sure that these fit with any compliance or regulatory requirements that you have, and that you have similar conditions around interacting with data with AI as you do with your other data based on those. And then really the big one is that you want to provide some training
Yeah.
for your employees on how to implement these guidelines.
As you're saying this, it's not dissimilar to any new initiative a company would put out. I mean, these are the same proper protocols you'd fulfill conceivably anytime you kick out a new initiative. Very similar.
They are, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Great. Hope that answer. There were more questions, but we'll just stop with those three because we definitely want to move on to the most exciting part.
Yes.
And that is the live demo. So Lance is going to do 2 or 3 actual demos of how he sees clients using this in the field. Clearly, I need to give this to the tech specialist.
Perfect. No, you're all good here. All right. So taking a look at this one, this is our first use case example. So this is the Copilot assistant. I'm leveraging it in Outlook, but this is available anywhere inside of that Microsoft ecosystem here. And because it has access to email contacts, calendar items, basically everything that's in the Ecos Teams information is that I'm just asking it a kind of general question, which is, when is my next meeting with Kevin? And is there any particular information that can help me prepare for that? So we'll run it through here. It's pulling.
So it's pulling everything.
So it's pulling, yeah, you can see it here as it's looking for documents that may be related. It's looking for emails and attachments and meetings.
So this is all part of the ecosystem, right? When it's all connected, all of your Teams messages, emails, files, everything, attachments, the whole stream of communication.
That's exactly right. So in this case, it determined that my next meeting with you is scheduled for this Saturday, and we're doing a debrief on our webinar. And based on that, it's got an agenda, a meeting. So there was a document that was attached called AI Webinar Debrief that has access to, and then presentation materials. So here's the kind of cool stuff. So this was all included in the invite, this first one.
Mm-hmm.
All of these additional items are just information that it pulled from conversations that you and I and Will have had about the webinar and things that it thinks may be useful based on that.
So it came up with all of this. This doesn't live anywhere in any of your data.
It does not directly. So none of these other items were directly involved in that particular chain. So, and from here, I can ask it for information about any of the stuff here. These pieces here change contextually based on what it generated. So in this case, it says, hey, you might want to know what some key points are from your webinar notes.
Throw that in there. And
so I can throw that in here, and it will provide. So now it's scanning that particular document,
mm-hmm.
and then it's pulling key points and information from there.
I think
then provides a link right to that. So if I want to go take a look at that document, I can just open it right from here.
I mean, I'm sure our viewers are thinking to themselves, wow. Right. I mean, just the amount of time that we spend going and trying to find resources, get ready for meetings, this, that, everything else. And it did it in seconds.
Absolutely. So, and if you thought that one was pretty cool.
I did think that one was cool. You got a cooler one?
I do have one that I would say is at least as cool.
All right. I'm going to judge you on that.
So this is the one that we teased a little bit at the beginning, which is creating a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm just going to ask it to.
This is a clean PowerPoint.
Clean PowerPoint presentation.
All right.
And I'm going to go ahead and paste this prompt in here. So it's creating our slides on the fly. This is actually a new, pretty cool feature that Microsoft recently implemented. Is previous to this, some of what it was actually doing was was kind of under the hood. Mm-hmm. Now it's actually showing us what it's doing. So it's creating the titles on the slides here. So we'll see those populate in real time.
Wow.
Then we'll see it actually add the content to the slides, and then it will produce the actual PowerPoint presentation that we can go through and browse.
Wow. So it's getting the graphics, it's integrating it in. So just by putting in that prompt, it created the slides, set the tone, created notes at the very bottom here.
Yep. So we've got speaker notes that it's annotated here.
Wow.
For each one of these slides as we go through a created section. So it's using a consistent theme. So all the stuff we talked about, for those things that I don't love doing coming up with all these graphics. It did all of that. So we would obviously go in and customize this and adjust some of these things a little bit.
How would you, if
But-
you wanted, let's say you wanted to add a slide?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say as we're kind of going through here, we didn't really see anything about data security. So if we'd say we wanted to add a slide on data security.
Mhm. All right, so it's
So we just
working
have to
on
do
it.
that. So it'll generate and input that slide. It will take into consideration the previous content. We'll see that formatting and layout should be very similar to what is, and here we go. Here's
Wow.
our AI data security slide that it just added and included
The notes.
the speaker notes and annotation pieces there.
That is way quicker than I could have done it.
Yes.
Way quicker.
Yes. In fact, maybe we should have used this to generate our PowerPoint.
That would have been as fun.
It would not have been as fun. We would have gotten some prettier pictures though.
Right. True statement. You want to do a third and final demo?
Sure, we can do one last one here.
Yeah.
And this is really more kind of a glimpse into the future. So here we're in ChatGPT and we're using the 401 model. This just came out. It includes an advanced cognitive and analytical thinking where the engine actually thinks through processes here. And so you can give it very complex prompts. In this case, I'm using a really complex prompt that actually had it help generate.
Hold on. So you had ChatGPT create the prompt that you're now using to feed in.
That is
Okay.
That is correct. I asked it to create a prompt to produce essentially really high quality results based on any question and provide multiple iterations and options, and then some sort of like choice ranking. So in this case, all I had to input here was our problem statement, which we're saying, can you help me generate ideas, topic outline, and a marketing campaign for a follow-up to our webinar our company just presented on how small businesses can leverage to improve AI to improve workflows and efficiencies. And from here, it's going to go through and do all this stuff. The gist of what it's doing is that it's going to create options, it's going to rank those options, and then it's going to take the winning option and run that against the output 3 separate times.
All right. Okay, so it's thinking.
Yeah, and so here
There
we can
you go.
actually see that it's thinking. So it's telling us what it's doing as it goes through here. It's formulating strategies, then it will switch to something else where it's comparing data. At any point in time, as it's going through this thinking process, we can actually click on this drop down and it will show us what it's doing.
All right.
So here it's balancing, and we can also look at that at the end when it's done.
Got it.
So
Okay.
in addition to providing some advanced outputs here, we can go back through and review its logic in terms of how it came to that conclusion.
Yeah.
So it can do some pretty cool things. For folks who are used to and have leveraged this before, you might notice that this is definitely slower than leveraging 3, 5, or 4. And the reason why is because it was thinking through this whole thing. So this entire thing to run through at this point, see, we had to do 1 and then 3 and 3 and 3, essentially 12 iterations, rank order all the solutions, and then come up with a winner here, all took 52 seconds.
Right.
Yeah. So we say slow, but that's like relative compared to the output that we're getting here.
And this is PhD level thinking, is my understanding, right?
It is, yeah. So that's
Wow.
a couple of things with this new model. One is that it is on par with PhD level thinking in their areas of expertise, and it's also much better at advanced computational math.
Wow.
So it now and coding. So it now ranks in the essentially 90th percentile for coding tests.
Okay, so it's rank 3.
Yep,
It's
so it's
putting,
rank 3.
hold on, go back up. It's
Yep.
going, it says solution 3 first. And go down a little bit further if you would. 1 and then 2. Okay,
Yep.
so it's ranked it
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So it scored them all here,
And there you go.
and then it's ranking them from there. And then so from here, it's taking our one that won.
Got
It's
it.
providing a couple of additional options against that. It's going to rank those.
Got it.
Then it's going to re-rank these.
Okay.
So here, our original one won.
Got
So
it.
it proceeds to the next round where it's going to do the same thing.
Compare it
It
again.
goes through here, looks at the effectiveness here on these 3 solutions.
Mhm.
It's still like solution 3 originally, the iteration, and then this is our final iteration. It's going to go through, do our comparison here of each of these options. It will give us our rank. Then it gives us our final solution, which is AI tools and platforms for small businesses, a comprehensive guide. And then it provides an output for why it thinks it's superior.
Got it.
Here, highly efficient, reusability, evergreen material, it's scalable, has strong marketing possibilities, feasibility for resource management. And here are the key features that make it optimal.
And a
And
conclusion.
it concludes it here.
Wow. In 56 seconds, that's a lot.
Yeah,
To do it 3
for
times.
something that otherwise, if you and I and Will sat down, this could be a multi-hour brainstorming
Right.
activity here. And certainly we'd go in and customize this, right? But this gives us a really nice outline and some direction on what might make sense as a next step with way less effort than it would take traditionally.
So to summarize, we saw content creation from scratch vis-a-vis PowerPoint, which I presume could be done also in Word.
Correct. Yeah. Word, and you can manipulate data in Excel more than creating it. Usually Excel's already pre-populated.
Right. And then we saw an example of how once all of your data is synced into Copilot, emails, documents, et cetera, how it can go out and pull it and basically be your executive assistant for way less than the cost of an executive assistant. And then the third example here is using very high level thought process, multiple. I mean, that was 3 iterations and really close to human thought. I mean, maybe not there yet, but pretty close.
Pretty close. And we could always go back up and look at this too, if we wanted to recheck some of its thinking and see if we see any flaws in this.
Right.
By expanding this thought process where it will go through and explain exactly what it was doing through each one of these steps as it was building this out.
Wow. Well, that's way more than the one-line ask to
Yes.
ChatGPT. I love the fact that you used ChatGPT to create the prompt to prompt it to do this. Pretty cool. Great. Well, that concludes our webinar for this afternoon. Lance, I can't thank you enough. You took a lot of time out of the field to do this. And every time we do these presentations, I always learn at least a couple of things. And I did today as well. Can't thank you enough.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And take care. We'll see you next time.